I guess I'm going to have to change my pronouns now from you to we, right? Now that I'm a Rotarian. And this all started at a Rotary Club presentation. And Monica Martin, a Rotarian, after we did a presentation based on an opinion exchange article that I had written, the president of the Rotary Club up in Monticello said, "Hey, Tim, would you come up and talk about this article you read?" I said, "Sure." After Tim Munkeby and I presented to the Rotary Club, the first question was to the community ed director. And they said, "Hey, is anything these guys are talking about relevant here in Monticello?" And Jeremiah Mack said, "Oh yeah," and went on to explain the difficulty all of our communities are facing when it comes to reading. And Monica Martin, the Rotarian's hand went up and she said, "I want to create a model here in Monticello that will work for Spanish-speaking people." And she's part of the Latinos Helping Latinos group. And she said, "And I want to take that and I want to replicate it anywhere in the state." And so the next phone call went to this courageous leader, Eric Olson. And Eric called me up and said, "Hey, let's talk. Let's figure out what we can do." And so this one Rotarian got this started. And the bottom line is we have a big, hairy, audacious goal. We want to transform Minnesota to be the state with the highest reading proficiency, with the fewest racial inequities, and we want to get there with a fierce urgency of now. And we want to make our benchmarks that every kid is wired to read by age 3 and then reads proficiently at grade level. That's what this is all about. That's why we, as Rotarians, would like to talk with our school experts about what can civic organizations do more of? What could we do collectively as a community to hold ourselves accountable for making sure that every kid is a proficient reader? So let's begin by going back to 3rd grade. Now, I don't think this is the practice anymore, Eric, right? But in a Catholic grade school that I was in, we would do a reading class, and then each kid would have a paragraph, right? And you'd go around, write the paragraph. And then when it became your turn, you had to read the paragraph. So I want you to think about yourself as that 3rd grader. And it is coming to your turn, and you don't read proficiently. What's that going to feel like? What are the feelings that are going to emerge? Panic?
Crawl under the desk.
What was that?
Crawl under the desk.
Crawl under the desk. The behavior that would go along with that feeling, yes. What other feelings? Frustration. Shame. Failure. Fear. Anxiety. Now, next is recess. What are the kids going to say about you at recess? Loser.
Slow.
What was that?
Slow.
Slow. Dumb. So the consequences of not reading, what are they? What do you think some of the consequences are for a kid, for an adult who can't read? Start a fight and be sent to the principal's office. Behavior problems, yes. What else is correlated with not being able to read?
Low test scores.
Low test scores?
Shame.
Yeah. Shame.
Poor self-esteem.
Yeah, poor self-esteem.
Absenteeism.
Absenteeism, yep, truancy. Yes. Those are all the consequences. And you've hit on many of these, right? You're more likely to get poor grades, be truant, drop out of school, end up in special education, the discipline problems, and think about the ripple effect that has on the family, the neighborhood, the economic system, right? Who's going to hire a kid who can't read? And the shocking results are that there's a correlation between not being able to read and the early childhood development and our criminal justice system. 85% of juveniles in their juvenile court system are functionally illiterate, and 70% of inmates read at the 4th grade level. There is a correlation. And why is this the scope of the problem? Over half of the kids in our classrooms, K-12, do not currently read proficiently. That's 500,000 kids. You could fill up the US Bank Stadium 7.5 times with that number of kids. So our reading proficiency, and this is the 3rd grade reading proficiency scores, even if you look at, everybody talks about, it's the COVID effect, right? Well, even if you look before COVID, we were at 55.7%. So still nearly half of the kids in our classrooms were not reading proficiently. And here in Roseville, I went online because the new Minnesota READ Act requires schools to report on their goals. So here in Roseville, the goal is to move from a 45.6% proficiency to 51.1% by 2025. Now, do you think it's because kids can't learn? No. Kids are little sponges, right? They pick up things really quickly. And what is really well documented in a podcast called Soul to Story is the fact that the way in which we've taught kids, we've learned doesn't work. And so now we're moving towards what most of us are calling the science of reading. We've got experts here who can dive into more of the detail of that. So it's not because kids can't learn. And if you think about the fact that the reading proficiency scores, underneath all of that are some incredible inequities that our community needs to grapple with. And while it does affect all socioeconomic groups, it really does hit much more severely our BIPOC population. So if you think about our post-George Floyd efforts as a community to do something about the inequities, there is no stronger there's no stronger tool to create equity than giving a kid the capacity to read. So Roger already kind of did the plug for the fact that our goal is to get kids wired to read by age 3 because of the incredible amount, 80% of your brain is developed during those 3 years. And what we've done as a state, you probably heard a lot about the Minnesota READ Act. That is simply creating a statewide policy that says, hey, we're not going to mess around anymore in Minnesota. Mississippi has greater reading proficiency scores right now than Minnesota does. They have fewer racial inequities than Minnesota does. Minnesota is the 2nd worst state in the country for our reading and educational inequities. Mississippi is beating us. So the READ Act was like, okay, enough already. We're going to move to the science of reading. And the various things that the READ Act is to empower schools with this new approach. And I think I'm going to let the experts say much more about the READ Act. But from my perspective, when you've got policy and you've got, no matter how grand, if it's not followed with execution, it's just wishful thinking, and worse, it's really a lie. And children are the ones who pay the price if we don't get our act together as adults and do what needs to be done to make sure that kids are equipped and have the brain power, and we develop their brains so that they're capable of reading. Now, what happens often in these discussions is, well, it's all because of those parents, or it's all because of the schools. We could finger point all day long, right? The rally to read is really about how do we mobilize our collective social capital to solve this issue. Whether you love or loathe Fidel Castro, one of the things that he did was move Cuba from a country with the lowest reading proficiency to one of the highest in 18 months. And it became a UNESCO kind of model for how developing countries can develop the capacity of their citizens to read. Guess what one of the key things was? Mobilizing volunteers, training them, and making sure that they went out to every little corner of the country. So if Cuba can, Minnesota certainly can. So policy executed on a scale that matches the problem, and the scope of the problem is what Cuba did. And they made it their primary target, and they put what little resources they had toward making it happen. And with our big, hairy, audacious goal, we have the capacity here in Minnesota. And I talk about a fierce urgency of now because 70,000 kids are born every year in Minnesota. Think about that. We got 3 years to maximize each one of those 70,000 kids' brains. We don't have time to wait. And it would be tragic if we added 70,000 kids to the 500,000 that we already have who are illiterate. So this is our opportunity to move quickly. We've talked about this. Minnesota really has no excuse not to. Harvard professors study what happens in Minnesota, and we're called the capital of social capital. Because nobody has the number of volunteers, the number of Rotarians, the number of people who volunteer and give money and contribute and vote. Nobody can do it like Minnesota. And so I want people to feel both the infuriated and inspired. Infuriated that this problem exists and inspired that we can do something about it. And what we want to make sure as we do this, and I want to make sure that the educators talk about this, is look at what what we know works best and what research guides us so that when we do engage the community, we're doing it in the smartest way possible. So that brings us to Roseville's call to action. And I got to tell you, I am not a literacy expert. I'm not an educator. I did work for the Department of Education for 7.5 years, so I understand kind of the education bureaucracy. I did coordinate 17 school districts in Hennepin County and work statewide with a bunch of school districts. So I understand school bureaucracy. But my passion is engaging and mobilizing communities to solve very difficult problems. And I've been blessed by having people like Tim Munkeby, who called me up and said, I read that article you wrote, we need to talk. He put me in touch with Roger Sheldon, Dr. Roger Sheldon, who has really opened my eyes and many of our eyes on how important it is to focus on that early age group. And then there's nobody better than leading the charge in a community than Eric Olson, who is the perfect champion for what's happening. And he and Monica Martin have been the champions of what's going on in Monticello. So I'd like to stop and switch to kind of, all right, now what is Monticello doing? How are they taking this call to action? And just as a new member of the club, they have this idea that they're going to be the first school district with the highest reading proficiency score. Do we really want them to beat us to it? Yes, we have a question. Go ahead.
How did Minnesota get so far behind?
Ooh, how did Minnesota get so far behind? I don't know that I am the expert in that, but I think part of the problem has been, and Peter Hutchinson, who was the superintendent of Minneapolis schools, Berdelia Johnson, who was also superintendent of Minneapolis public schools, talked about how frustrating it was to be a superintendent when the teachers coming out of the higher education systems did not know how to teach the science of reading. And so systemically, Superintendent Johnson had to spend $17 million a year retraining teachers how to teach the science of reading. And Peter Hutchinson said, we've known since 1970 that this doesn't work, and now we're just now getting to setting our policy straight on changing that course of direction. So in part, it's been, what's that?
Gaps is another answer.
Gaps. And I'm going to leave, I think I want to defer that question till later, because I think the education experts in here can give a lot richer kind of response to that question, but I think it's a really good question. Looking back, to me, what's really important is moving forward, what can we do? And we know what we can do. We know how to solve this problem. That's the beauty of it. Anyway, Eric, you want to kick us off, and then let's have some of the other educators talk about what it could take.
So I think when this first came to me, this idea, I was intrigued for two reasons. Mobilize social capital. Get the community involved. And for the last 4 years of my career at Monticello as a superintendent, I have seen community get involved, but it hasn't always been in a productive fashion. We are at a time right now where people like to be polarized, and that polarization keeps us from doing oftentimes the work that we know how to do, that we're trained to do, that we're passionate to do. And instead, we spend our time working on things that we wouldn't normally have to work on. But pulling a community together was my first reason where I started to look at this as with open eyes and be intrigued. And then my second reason for doing this is I've always heard about the achievement gap that happens with different groups of students. And I've never been able to write policy. I've never been able to develop the training practices needed to help all students. But my tagline in Monticello is every kid, every day. And so I was intrigued. What does that really mean? What does that look if we train our teachers differently? And then along with the achievement gap, looking at that through the lens of all students, but a different approach. Has anybody ever heard that there's something called a summer slide? What is a summer slide?
Forget what you learned.
What's that?
You forgot what you learned.
Forgot what you learned during the school year. And so if the summer slide was real, and you look at gaps of time, gaps of people, then I started really being curious about what's happening in every child's home from the ages 0 to 4 before they come to school. Because we only get 50% of the students who come to community education. We get 50%. So I started being very intrigued by this program. And so now I'm going to fast forward. Everything that Tim said was true. It started with a Rotarian. She came to me and said, I have this idea. I was intrigued, and we pulled the community together. I sent a letter out to businesses in Monticello, population of 12,000. When I started work in the district 20 years ago, we were 4% diversity, and now we are over 20% diversity. And so we haven't kept up with some of the things that we needed to do. And so I wrote a compelling letter to businesses, to parents, and I sent it out to 50 people, and 85 showed up. People care about kids. And I believe that we're onto something here. But for me, it's going to hopefully unite our community in literacy, which I believe is the great equalizer in the United States of America. And for some reason, we let other things take that concept or that deep-rooted feeling away. And it also is going to, it's going to help us really even the playing field of what's happening in our community for all families, 0 to 4. So that when they come to us, we know that they have some kind of foundation built. And so I can tell you about 3 different things that we have immobilized that community on already. And so after that meeting of 85 people, we have had a second meeting, and then we've developed some concepts further in Monticello so that we could have some actionable plans. The first actionable plan we have is called the Community Connections Team. So the Community Connections Team, and I'm going to just give you a brief description of what this task force is doing. This task force, there was already something going on in the community, and they were some of the people who came to our first meeting, but it's called Friends of the Library. And this group, they do something called Books for Babies. But they came to the first meeting and they said that we have a problem because we give 1 free book at the hospital in a bag with county and community resources. And then there's even a coupon for a second free book in that folder. But hardly anybody's coming. About 10% of people are coming for that second free book. We have a gap. We have an inequity. And so we started looking at what can we do with that Books for Babies concept, because it's working, at least for the initial contact. And what we decided to do is to partner with something that could be sustainable over time and give every child 1 book per month. And it's the Imagination Library. And so we are working some of the funds that we're trying to raise in the community of Monticello are going to go towards giving every child in the community 1 book per month. We're going to partner with Center Care on that. We're partnering with our community that came forward, and they're going to be volunteers to anybody who's not birthed in the Center Care system in Monticello that we have through Community Ed. We have a database that we're going to be able to track our students and track our families as they're born and make sure that we go make that initial contact with that Books for Babies. So we're going to beef it up. It's going to have the Rally to Read logo on one side. It's going to have Books for Babies on the other side. And then all of our sponsors are going to be on this canvas bag. In that bag is going to be that 1 free book. It's going to be a coupon for a community education family class. And it's going to be a coupon for that second free book. And there's going to be an iPad that the volunteers will have to sign every child up with Imagination Library. So that's kind of the concept of that first group, the Community Connections Team. It's got both human capital and it's got obviously a monetary fund balance that we're going to have to seek. And we've just started getting this down to where we are going to, we're out in the community right now. We've went to 3 people, 3 partners that were at that first meeting, and we've already pledged over $20,000. So we have this first committee kind of taken care of. And now we've moved on to making sure that we look at this second phase of our community called the Community Action, and that's the Education and Awareness team. And this team is really about looking at where are children when they're 0 to 4. So we know they're either in community education, they could be in in-home daycares, they could be in centers, they could be in Montessori's, they could be in faith-based communities. And so part of this committee is putting a cohort of people together that are going to be from all representatives of those groups. And in that cohort, we're going to pull people together, and together we're going to develop the community resources that we can find common ground and believe in. And so that way, all of our places across the community, including homeschool, I forgot to mention that, including anybody who, is a stay-at-home family with their kids. We're going to make sure that we have them counted for on that cohort. And then through this cohort, we're going to try unify the resources that are used to help children learn through those 0 to 4 years. And it's really not about learning like we're envisioning maybe when I say that word, but it's about play, it's about mentorship, it's about making sure that kids have the appropriate resources in front of them. And in order to do that, we have to start at wherever children are. We have to unify what we're doing in those places. Or the education awareness team is doing. And then along with that group, they're also going to do some of the fun literacy activities that we're doing across town. We're going to continue doing, but we're just going to use Rally to Read also as a focus of parent education. So it has two components to it. It has the cohort of wherever children are. We're going to make sure we unite those resources. And then also the second prong of that education awareness team is to make sure that our events are parent focused, and we can help our parents with resources. We're going to do that in multiple places, including Cargill. So it's not going to be at the school always. It's to go where children are and where families are and where your most diverse populations are. Of diverse populations of workers. And so we just struck a kind of a partnership in that last week. And so instead of always bringing them to our community education facility where our pre-K and kindergarten center is, we're going to make sure we go to the community for these events just as equal amount of times that we bring them in. And then the last task force is the Every Kid, Every Day. And this one is going to be it's going to be a combination of structures that we're going to develop, but really partnering with Early Reading Corps, and making sure that we're using the science of instructional strategies, especially as the children get older into that 3 and 4 years of age. But this position also, or this community response team also has a sponsor a child in a preschool program. Because we notice oftentimes that why children might not come to a community education program, early education program, is sometimes there are barriers, and we want to take down those barriers. And so we're going to build and adopt a preschool program in this. And so that's where any of the funding that comes as part of any of these 3 community strategy focus teams, the budget for all 3 is $131,000 in how we're doing business right now. So that's Imagination Library. That's making sure we have our cohorts established for early learning places and in-home daycares. And then the final one is has quite a bit of expense, is the adopt a student for preschool. So those are our ways that we're going to start by uniting the community in Monticello, and we started with those 3 action teams. So I'm kind of, he's the guy with that idea, and I'm just the person who listened and was able to get it to a point where we're out in business. Our goal is to start Imagination Library with all children who are born after November 1st. And we, like I said, we already have that first $20,000 raised for that committee. And so we know that we can do that one for a year. Because that's what that one costs.
Hey, Eric, would you comment about embedding the 3 action teams, then specific cultural strategies that take place?
One of our committees is, we used to have it as a standalone committee, but it was like the cultural awareness team. And then we started really realizing what we really need to do is have that team start looking at everything through a cultural lens. And so we're doing that in our schools through the MTSS strategy process and through family engagement. We have been part of MTSS from the state of Minnesota in their Compass cohort for the last 2 years. So I absolutely believe in the structures that we're building in school. And now we're trying to build some structures for those children and families who are not in school yet. So the cultural awareness is just going to make sure that all of our work that we're doing takes into account and applies best practices for reaching all children, especially the BIPOC population.
Thank you. Hey, this is a civic organization that wants to know how could it contribute to better reading outcomes? What could we as civic organizations do that would really make the most difference in terms of helping achieve reading proficiency? I would love for those of you from school districts who'd want to share some insights on that so that the club could actually look at these are the things that would really matter to us. Does anyone want to kick that conversation off? And maybe because we're going to record it, if you wouldn't mind coming up here to share those ideas. Dave, how much time were we at?
So we're about at the top of the hour, so we could combine Q&A with also hearing perspectives from educators,
Perfect.
and we'd be fine.
Okay, good. And I think if there's folks who want to respond from the schools, maybe come up here so we could capture it. Q&A, or anyone from the schools want to come forward? Please.
You know, as an immigrant,
Would you mind coming up so we can capture your thoughts? Thank you.
As an immigrant, and I grew up in South Korea, and I go there a lot too. And how, and then many years ago, I was the first Asian American to serve as a University of Minnesota Board of Regents. And back then, we already know inequality, that it is, we are going from bottom. How are we educating our children? North Minneapolis is different than Edina. And why is that? So when I go to Korea, I tell some politicians here too, they're a bunch of yellow people. We're all yellow. So there's no black, brown, white, diversities. So they all teach everybody equally. And this country is a great country. I love America. But I think there's something, it's about time this is happening. I'm so honored today to meet you to do this because, we have to educate our children no matter who they are. Because in 14 years, 70% of Minnesotans will be person of color. That's a reality. And how are we going to include everybody? And I wrote my book too. And I think that I had a pretty tough childhood, but one thing that I escaped from who I am now here is that I read book like crazy. When I was 15, I read Nietzsche. So I have two sons. One is really following my route, so he's a very well-read and he's a good writer. Then I have my other son, he's a sport jockey, but he cannot read well, and he's 43 years old. So I just wanted to thank you. Thank you. It's just this is why I belong to Rotary Club. So thank you, and anything that we can do as a Rotary Club, I am volunteering to. Thank you.
Just a comment, Rotary is organized in districts, so we got clubs and districts and so on. We're in District 5960. We have a district literacy team in 5960. It's been focusing on math and finance rather than things like reading. But it strikes me that here's an opportunity to even work through the district because we could then get a hold of, involve all of the clubs in the district.
What I'd like to say, I guess, is first off that Roseville Schools has identified literacy as the biggest social justice issue of our time, which it clearly is. We have been looking for years as to how can we improve reading, and about 4 years ago, we began our curriculum review process around literacy and language arts, and we identified the sciences reading as a direction we were taking. So we actually identified letters training, which is a 2-year, very intensive training program available to our teachers to help them learn about the science of reading, not just at a high level, but how do you actually implement it on a daily basis in the classroom. And so we sent a cohort the first year in the 2-year program, and we got most all the other elementary school teachers in the second year. This fall, we've invested, we have new curriculum for our elementary reading program to try to align with the science of reading, the right materials. We were not very pleased with what is out there in terms of the absent narratives or the perspectives or sometimes even the language of some of these books. We have been partnering with one of the providers of materials, and they were very open to our feedback early on and have already changed quite a bit of materials, but it's still got a long ways to go. We use a lot of supplemental materials to try to provide some of those other perspectives. So we are ahead of the state by, I don't know, 3 years or more. 3 years. I got confirmation. Great, thank you. Because I'm talking about it from perspective of governance, but we have some folks in here who can talk about it from a more practical and everyday perspective. So we're investing in this. We really are wanting to really amp up our partnership with the community. And I know, as I mentioned earlier, that the Rotarians have been attending our community advisory committee and have been partnering with us in the past. I know you guys did some amazing work years ago even with the library and providing books for kids over the summer and for young students to have reading materials. And we'd love to get you involved and get you further engaged. We have a number of partners out there. For example, we have a church who provides volunteers for every single classroom in that school building for Central Park. It makes an amazing difference to have some resources there. So both financial and people resources make a huge difference because we're in this as a community. We really are committed to making this kind of difference, and so really appreciate the fact that the work you're doing. I know it's not easy work and it's hard work, but it's really, really important work. So thank you for prioritizing it enough to have a presentation tonight.
So Eric, what I liked is just your focus to say we want to make literacy a rallying point to unite us as a community.